This setup is simple, it's clean as fuck, and it's really powerful. So about the setup, we have the glorious SSL Big Six. We also have the APC40 Mark II. This is my favorite Ableton controller, and we have Ableton Live. And going back to the power of this setup, I focus a lot on DAW-less, like hardware, electronic instruments. They're super fun. They're also great for sort of like creating your own type of performance, your own workflow. But it's the sort of thing where you kind of have to accept that you're gonna make a big mess. Lots of wires, lots of setup time. Even with this setup, there's still, quite a few wires to work with, but still with something like this, you just cannot beat the efficiency. I'm using Ableton to launch loops, clips, and samples, all of which are from my latest sample pack, Techno Starters Volume 1. A huge thanks to those of you who have already picked up the pack. Your support is very much appreciated. I've included a YouTuber Insider 25% discount for the pack, which is also linked in the description. All you have to do is use the code ORBIT25 at checkout to get that 25% discount. Just a little thank you for being here and watching my content in general. So let's get started. The first thing we're gonna look at is this effects rack here in Ableton. This is not a rack that I came up with myself. It's actually my buddy Victor, so you can see it right here, Victor FX rack. For my particular setup and approach in this form, this rack definitely needs quite a bit of work. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to mute everything but kick and hi-hats. Let's play this. In its current form, we have modulation. So let's try this with the hi-hats, see what that does. So we're losing a bit of attack, but we're getting these weird sort of modulated sounds. That alone, especially for high percussion perks, I find, is a great way to just spice it up like right on the spot. On top of that though, we have this speed modulation to add something else underneath. Right, so it's getting all choppy and gritty, and this is what the original hi-hat sounded like. So usually I would just add maybe a little bit of modulation. I never go too crazy with this, just to make the hi-hats move a little bit, because we're using a sample. I'll unmute this fourth track to demonstrate the next thing. Turn up the modulation on this snare thing. So that's what that sounds like. And then we have another one here, it's called loop. So let's get a little crazier with this. And then we're gonna loop it. Right, so you can see that it's looped. I think it's a 2-bar phrase. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then I could take it off. This could be a cool thing for transitions because if you're looping, let's say, just to give you an example. So let's loop this again. And if I move on to the next scene, let's say, or clip or whatever you want to call it, I moved on, but it's still looping. And then if I go back, now I'm in my next scene. You're of course not limited to percussive parts for this. If I open up this melodic tom thing, whatever this is, let's do the same thing. So this is 6. Get some modulation going. And let's see what happens. Okay, kind of cool. Next again. Okay, and then we'll open up everything else. And this becomes like a really cool melodic part now. On top of this, currently there's a low cut as well as gain per channel. There's also shape, which I'm pretty sure is an external VST that I don't have, so I don't have access to that right now. But low cut and high cut, I should say, so I'm doing it on the kick. There's also delay and reverb here, which I actually don't use because there's no tail to it, so I don't find it quite as useful. The way around that is to add a gain utility to your delay and reverb, turn the mix up to 100% on the delay and reverb, and then assign the MIDI controller to that gain. That's how you get a tail. But regardless of all that, that's all taken care of in the SSL Big Six. I find this is just a much more useful way. I like to work here mostly. What else would I add to this effects rack? I'm thinking of possibly adding some sort of stutter effects, although we kind of have to be careful with those because they are hella overused, as well as maybe some sort of granular effect, but maybe without the delay. Because I am at this point using exclusively longer samples, it might be cool to have something to sort of chop them up into little pieces and see what happens. Now let's zero in on the APC40 Mark II, which is, of course, a MIDI controller that's controlling all the parameters in Ableton. This is, in my humble beginner opinion, the best, at least beginner MIDI controller for Ableton. Even though it's over 10 years old now, it sort of just fits with like the simplicity aspect of this video. Just to give you an idea of how awesome it actually is, the demand never went away. I think they discontinued it 2 years ago. They've recently re-continued it. If you're interested in maybe picking one up, I've left affiliate links in the description of this video for the APC40 Mark II as well as the Big Six. Using either of those links would help me a lot at no extra cost to you. What makes it so simple is that it's meat and potatoes. It's an identical grid layout of the Ableton Live grid right here. As soon as you connect it, everything is just auto-mapped. So these faders are auto-mapped here, as you can see. The panning per track up here is also auto-mapped, although again, I don't really use that because I have panning in my mixer. Scene launch here is also auto-mapped. And of course, if I want to, I could jump to, individual scenes without changing the entire scene. Of course, I didn't have to do anything. And of course, if you're an Ableton user, then I guess you're used to that. You've sort of taken that for granted, and that doesn't seem like much. But if you're coming from like the electronic music hardware, DAW-less world, or even some sort of hybrid setup, where chances are you're going to have to map everything individually from one unit to the next, like it's a lot of work. I've left these last 2 channels empty, although if I wanted to, I could add more channels, but I feel like 6 is enough. These are empty because I use them for effects. So I have effects buses on either of these channels. So this one is external reverb, and this one is external delay. I'm using Valhalla Vintage Reverb for the reverb and Valhalla Supermassive for the delay, which is free, by the way. So go pick that up if you haven't already. Like just even on these hi-hats, there's a bit of reverb as well as delay. And also when you mute the track, you still get those effects in the background, which is kind of nice. Obviously, the APC40 Mark II adds some sort of hardware feel to Ableton. I mean, that's the entire point. But then the SSL Big Six brings that hardware feel to an entirely new level, right? Because it's an actual piece of hardware. It's a hardware mixer, which also happens to be an audio interface for my Ableton Live session. Just to make a comparison here, some of you might also know that I love the Model 1.4 by Play Differently, which is a really amazing mixer. The only inconvenience is that it's fully analog, so you need an audio interface just to power it with Ableton. It's just a little bit more bulky to set up, and of course that's made a difference because I find myself going for the Big Six even for live approach stuff like this. All that being said, there are still advantages of the Model 1.4. I actually did a full comparison between the Big Six and the Model 1.4 or Model 1 over on my Patreon, so go check that out if you're interested. Some other useful things to have in a live setting with the Big Six. Of course, you have individual EQ per channel. You could also EQ your reverb, which is kind of cool, and your delay. So let's say if you want a more like MIDI sort of reverb, mid as in like mid-range, or a higher range reverb, or anywhere in between. Usually I cut my lows for delay as well as reverb, otherwise it just gets a little bit too muddy for me. When it comes down to performance for me, simplicity kind of just always wins. And even though the sounds won't always be the same, the sounds being the samples that I'm using in my session, but to me this definitely feels like a good home base to sort of build reflexes on, as opposed to trying to learn new gear every time that I try to create music. And in the case of this video, maybe inspiring you to release your own music officially to platforms like Spotify and Apple Music and many others, well, let me tell you about the most affordable and convenient way of doing that. It's by using DistroKid. They are a music distribution platform, and they're geared specifically to independent artists like myself and possibly you. Here's a few reasons why they're great. In terms of what's new, they recently released a smartphone app, which makes checking your important DistroKid stats easy and accessible. The app is now available on Android through the Play Store. Essentially everything that you've been able to do on the DistroKid desktop app, you're now able to do through your smartphone. In today's day and age, we all know how many hats we have to wear as artists and producers. It can just be a lot, so write the music, produce the music. Then you've got to create content to promote it a few weeks before it's released. Then you've got to continue creating content after it's been released to promote it. It's a lot, and I'm not saying that DistroKid does all of this work for you, but they do make it a lot easier for us with the free promotional tools that they offer. The one I use most is Hyperfollow. It's essentially a free landing page or link tree. It's super clean. You could link maybe your latest video, your latest single, other important links you'd like to lead people to. I also use promo cards whenever I release a single. Just select the single that you would like to promote and it'll auto-generate a few different options for you to choose from. Go with DistroKid. It's just over $20 a year to release unlimited music to all major streaming platforms. You keep 100% of your streaming royalties. So many other tools that they offer for someone who's independent. They're made for us. And there is a discount linked in the description of this video if you would like to join.